And next up, in a couple minutes here, we have Gadi from Singular, who is going to be discussing UA in iOS 14, tips for success in a post-IDFA world. Should be a great topic. Looks like Gadi is joined and getting ready. Hi, welcome.
How you doing?
Excellent. Welcome to the digital stage.
Yeah, thanks so much. Pleasure to be here, everybody. It's so weird talking to a bunch of people when you can't really see them, but we'll give it a go. I'm actually going to be sharing my screen, so you may see my face twice. So I'm going to shut down the video, and I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if it works. Hopefully, everybody's going to see that full screen. And can you guys see it? Callie, can you see it?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, perfect. So this is a new app I'm testing. It's a pretty cool app. And you can put my face right in front center and say hi to you guys. So today I'm going to talk about iOS 14. I'm sure you guys had already a lot of content that you've read about this, a lot of thoughts about the topic. You may have even had some talks during this conference already about it, but I wanted to give you sort of my angle as someone who's spent a lot of time in this space. I'm the CEO of Singular, one of the co-founders. Singular is the leader in data aggregation and creating that single pane of glass. In the last, I would say, 4 years, we've also added attribution to our set of capabilities across mobile, across web, and we have this really interesting viewpoint. And we've been having some amazing success with some of the largest gaming companies in the world. Many of them come in and use Singular's platform to basically solve all their data needs and from pretty much how to handle data from start to finish. And iOS 14 is obviously a big topic for us because in many ways our platform, in some aspects relies on IDFA and things like that. And in general, I found that to be fascinating. If I kind of think of the timeline, I've started dealing with IDFA really early on, and a lot of companies were thinking about it. I tried to do something different, so we set up a group called Mobile Attribution Privacy, and I'll talk about that more later. But what was interesting is that we actually brought a bunch of really good companies into a room and started talking, and it was like a year and a half ago. What would happen if IDFA goes away? That conversation quickly evolved into a Slack group that kind of exploded in size and a lot of interesting conversations. And I guess if I think of the timeline, then really, what happened is, how do I hide myself? Let's see, maybe that one. Nope. Maybe I'll zoom myself out. There we go. So in 2018, there's been IDFA rumors. I mean, there's always been IDFA rumors, right? With UDID being replaced and IDFA coming, there was always a question of, is this only a matter of time until Apple removes IDFA as well? In March, Apple released Ska Network version 1, which was, when you looked at it, it was very scary. It was something that a lot of companies were starting to analyze, and it looked very restrictive. And then in June 2019, the rumors heated up again, and everybody was kind of thinking that Apple's going to remove the IDFA in that WWDC, but it didn't happen. And interest levels were still low because, IDFA is so fundamental. You can only speak about it so much when nothing's really happening. But still, we started the Mobile Attribution Privacy Group, MAP, in August 2019, and we garnered some interest. There was, it's funny, it was about 20 companies in the beginning, and that Slack group was pretty boring. And trust me, I would prefer boring over other things. But then in June of 2020, the rumors were confirmed, and essentially everything started exploding since. Apple, in their developer conference, announced the application of IDFA. You'll need to get it via opt-in. You guys know all the changes. I'm sure it's been discussed to death. And then we've had last 3 months that were just insane. They were insane for me, for everybody in the space who's a vendor, for the advertisers, for everybody who's trying to figure out how are things going to look like. And I think that the interest has exploded, so that tiny Slack group became 2,000 participants from every company in the space talking about this in depth. And I spent an enormous amount of time. People made fun of me for how much content I wrote, but it's just such a fascinating topic to understand what happens to this industry when there's such a disruption. And we felt like we were coming from a really good spot talking about this topic. I mean, we understand almost every aspect of the marketing, advertising ecosystem, the tech stack. So we had a really good position to talk about these things. And then most recently, about a week ago, hopefully, I'm sure everybody knows, Apple gave us an extension. And I feel like it was sort of, people were breathing again, because we were supposed to be in the launch date. I think this was the estimated date for iOS 14 launch, September 14th. And if Apple hadn't given that extension, there would not be any IDFA anymore, and people would be scrambling and the market wasn't ready. So I think this extension was good. And we spent a lot of time getting ready. And I have to tell you that I think, out of all vendors, like if you guys are following the news, we basically announced Ska Network support 2 days after WWDC. We've been working on it for a while. It was obvious that that's where things are going to go. And we did that much sooner than all of our, MMP friends and competitors. And there was a lot of pushback. People were saying, why you guys give it up? And Apple will be convinced because of this. And what about fingerprinting and device graphs? And for us, it was very, very obvious the way that Apple's talking about it and the way that Apple's thinking about it, that these things like fingerprinting and device graphs, there's no way that these things are going to work at scale. There's just no way, because it's too good to be true. It's essentially goes against everything they're trying to achieve with their privacy changes. And so we just need to rethink, what does this mean for the industry? And it doesn't mean that marketing or performance marketing or user acquisition doesn't exist. It just means that we need to adapt. And so what are the things that we have right now? Well, the IDFA deprecation, Apple pushed it to early next year. And they didn't specify a date. And I think everybody's hoping that this essentially, by pushing the deadline, they're giving all of us a lot of time to prepare for the switch over to Ska Network and kind of testing our models and starting to learn how to operate without IDFA. In regards to Ska Network, I'm sure most of you in the audience know what it is, but if not, I'll do a quick recap. It's basically Apple's provided API for performance attribution. It's very minimalistic. It's very limited. It doesn't have a lot of features, but it is enabled by default to 100% of the users, whether they opt in or opt out. So it's just something that companies cannot ignore this. The implementation is not easy. The market's not fully there yet. Even though we were ready, a lot of our partners are not ready. And so, overall industry readiness is just not perfect. Our customers are not fully prepared. And so, every marketer was not fully prepared. So I think that Apple did a good thing. And then opt-in. So opt-in is still a highly discussed topic. Could companies gain enough consent from users so that things will go back to normal? Opt-in may still work, but at first I thought that Apple were trying to just let the consumer choose, but now it seems to me like Apple is actually not. They don't really want companies to succeed in getting a lot of opt-in, and the reason I say that is you see that pop up on the right. It says that it basically has this scary notification in bold, and then there's this text that says tracking consent request custom message. That's our sample app, but basically that's the only thing you can control. And then in terms of the buttons, do you realize that the ask app not to track, that's the first button that you see. And throughout iOS 14 beta, they've done a few iterations. At first, the buttons were inverse. So the default, the first button people click would be allow. Now they put the do not allow as the first button. And if you've spent time with iOS permissioning, you'd find that a bit weird. And let me show you an example. So this is the pop-up for location. in iOS 14. And as you notice, the default is allow, and then don't allow, right? So it starts as a pretty positive thing. And also the text says, do you allow this app to use local location? It doesn't include extra scary text like, by using your location, this app could spy on you and see, where you hang out, etc. Like, it just doesn't say that. It's a pretty minimalist pop-up. And the same for push notifications. You see that in this case, allows on the right, don't allows on the left. Not really sure which one has preference, but I tend to think you click yes or okay on the right side. So that's also sort of a positive looking pop-up, and it doesn't contain any scary text. And if you go back to this does scare you a bit, right? It's like tracking you across apps and websites owned by other companies. Like, that's pretty condemning text. And also the button is inverse. So it just seems to me like they don't really want it to succeed, which is fine. That's that's their stance. It's a shame. And I don't know, maybe this will change again before iOS 14 launches. But then one more thing that's interesting, this delay that they introduced, I don't know if you guys realize, but if people actually try and show the pop-up and they get a no, then they lose access to the IDFA. So it's almost like people are better off not asking. And the problem is that limits, at least for the next 4 to 6 months, as long as this IDFA is still around, it limits companies from iterating on opt-in, right? Which could have been a good thing, because what if companies were, they had 6 months to learn how to get enough opt-in to get used to the IDFA. So I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it seems like most people wouldn't even want to try and ask the question because it's not worth it. Maybe it will change, but that's how it works right now. So let's talk a bit about Ska Network and how do companies have to adapt when they're doing UA. And there's a lot of different angles from this. Some optimize for the consent, some talk about how you organize your UA strategy. I want to talk a bit about the mechanics of your data. So in Ska Network, what do we know? We know that there's no user level data. You get some granularity, the app, country, campaign, but that's limited to 100 campaigns. You get publisher, unless there's some unclear privacy thresholds, and we could talk about that later in the Q&A. And you can also get creative. And why do I say maybe? Because this encoding depends on the end network. For example, Facebook already notified that they'll use 9 campaign IDs. That's the max you can get as an advertiser. But they'll use the remaining campaign IDs allowed by Apple, which is 100 in total. They'll use that to test different things, including probably creatives. I also know other end networks that are going to have allow the advertiser to utilize some of the campaign IDs that are allowed by Apple and encode a campaign ID into an actual creative ID. So really you could say, I have 100 options, so maybe I'll just use 3 campaigns and I'll use the rest for creative testing. That way you could play with that number. But what are the challenges? Well, Ska Network, as I said, it's not easy to implement. And I just wanted to walk you through some challenges that you guys will face and hopefully, give you a taste of the things you need to think about. I see there's already some questions in Q&A. I'll get to that later. But give you some things to think about as you're planning your migration. And thankfully there's time now to do that, but we have to do that fast. So the first challenge is the way that you guys have been accessing the data changes. If you're running UA at scale, even if you're doing it on 3 channels, the conversion data historically used to arrive to the MMP directly. But now the conversion data in this new mechanism, Ska Network, is actually sent to the ed networks. And that means the marketers now need to figure out, how the hell do I get all this data from all these different ed networks into my BI? What we do, and I'm sure other solutions will probably have their own interpretation, but for us, it's a pretty obvious thing, would be to automate all this data and standardize it into a single place. Now, this is something that Singular has been doing for years. As we said, we're exceptionally strong at data aggregation. We're the leader in that category. So this solution will be something that we'll be able to do really well. But it's something you have to test. You have to make sure that your solution, analytics, MMP, or in-house build, whatever you're using, make sure you have a way to get this data. Now, why should you even get the Ska Network data? Because it contains your conversions. It's actually the only accurate source of installs and post-install data. And we'll talk about that more in a second. The second challenge is, how do you prevent fraud? And I know people, sometimes I'm sick of hearing about fraud, but it's a massive topic. I mean, have you guys seen Sour Mint recently and the Chinese SDK doing really, really genius things, to be honest? Like as an engineer myself, it's really smart what they did. But the fraud can attack in all sorts of vectors. And the sad part is that with Ska Network, it's becoming child's play. It becomes really easy to manipulate data, which is kind of sad. So first, I could take this Ska Network data and just send it to you twice as the advertiser, and you may pay me. So you need to verify that it's not duplicated. And Apple has a mechanism for that, but now someone needs to write that code and verify. I can also send you data that's not even signed by Apple, so that I could just fake a record and say, hey, there was an install. And the challenge with Ska Network is that there's no IDFA, there's nothing in there, there's no PII. So how could you verify that this is real or not? So again, Apple has a solution for that. They sign the data, you need to verify it. But probably the worst thing is, I mentioned that you could pass the post-install data as part of Ska Network. And I know it's an entire topic on its own. We'll talk about it in a second. The problem is, this is a value that Apple does not sign. Maybe they'll change it in the future, but today they're not touching it. So that means that if I am the ad network and I get the Ska Network post back, I get the data about an install, and it's signed by Apple, it looks legit, I could change the post-install value, and then it would still look legit, and there's no way to verify that. So basically, I could control what's my ROI of the campaign as the ad network. I could do whatever I want, and then send it over to the advertiser, and the advertiser will have to pay me, which is pretty insane, right? But that's what it is right now. So as I said, we spent a lot of time talking about Ska Network. I know this is a topic that no vendor is talking about right now. It's a bit more advanced, but basically we developed the only security solution for Ska Network, and it's pretty simple to implement. But it's something that we verified with all the ad networks that they will be willing to implement, and it's something that as an advertiser, you guys got to ask for it, because otherwise you'll just hear about it in some press release that there was a lot of fraud found, and there's, you could get ahead of it. Let's put it this way. The way that it works is basically it gets a bit more technical, but you can ask the device to send you a replica of the exact same postback that they sent to the ad network. You need the ad network's cooperation with that, and you need someone to receive that postback on your behalf. It could be your servers. We offer it to our customers as a service, but you could figure out, maybe start your real-time server. It needs to be very reliable because you don't want to lose this data. But it gives you a way to audit and run things in parallel to get the data directly from the device, and not just rely on what you're getting from the ad networks. Now, 99% of ad networks are awesome, super honest, etc. But there's always, bad actors. Like we've seen that in the news. It just happens, and there's financial motivation. So this thing will happen. You got to protect yourself. The next thing is post-install data. This is also a complex topic. Apple only gives us very limited amount of information that we could use inside the Ska Network mechanism. It's only 6 bits. Now, let me explain. 6 bits is so small that you can only encode a number between 0 and 63. So that's 64 options. That's all you could do. So imagine that every customer, if you wanted to describe how good they are, you had to choose one number to identify them. This customer is 17. This customer is 25. Your users, you have to figure out how to define their quality based on that. And that's pretty challenging. Also, what do you do about cohorts, right? How do we check 7-day ROI, 30-day ROI, our predicted LTV, return on investment? All that stuff becomes more challenging. And probably the most interesting thing is no one really knows how to use these 6 bits effectively yet. They need to test, and you couldn't even test because iOS 14 wasn't out. So everybody who claims to have a magic solution, they don't even know. You need to test it on your games. And every time you change it, you now need to push a new app version. Well, here's what we do for our customers. Again, think about it. Maybe you build it in-house. Maybe you use a vendor that does it well. Maybe you ask your MMP to do that. You need to figure out what works for your app, and you need to iterate fast. So what we did is we enabled a server-side component that could just change this formula in real time based on how you want it. So let's say that you want to convert revenue events into that number to describe that, you know, a higher number means more revenue. You could try it, see if it works. Maybe it doesn't work well for your game. Maybe you need something else. Maybe you want to try tutorial complete is number one. Made a first purchase is number two, and then you encode retention. There's all sorts of things you could do with these numbers. You just have to think about it. So I know I'm not giving the answers right now. This is just a teaser because these things require careful planning. And then lastly, ask yourself, how am I going to report? I mean, this IDFA hiatus is going to stop at some point, but you want to think about how do I make this Ska Network data actually usable, right? That's the most important part. You want to make decisions and optimize. And this is how the Ska Network data looks like in its raw form, right? Do you guys, can I point that direction? Yeah. Do you see those numbers? This is what you're getting. This is really bad. Like, you can't really use that to run any campaigns. You don't even know what campaign ID 73 means. So you need some layer of reporting. You know, what we do, and again, you'll build in your BI or go to a solution that does that. We basically translate all these numbers into meaningful names so that that number could be a campaign ID, a campaign name or a creative name, right? So you can actually see the image, or maybe the conversion value, that number that we talked about, the 63 options, that needs to be translated into some value as well. Maybe it's revenue, right? So you can get ROI, something. So this table, ask yourself, how do I get to produce this table? Because if you don't have the answer, you're not going to be able to run UA. So make sure you have the answer. So what should you do next? First, make sure you have the right Ska Network setup, because it is coming. And I don't know how long this suspension from Apple, or this temporary grace period is going to last. So make sure you're ready. Prep your internal BI. Just make sure that your infrastructure is ready for IDFA deprecation. Maybe you have entire tables built on it. Maybe you don't have an internal user ID or internal player ID. Start building those things. Audit your ad partners and MMP. Just make sure they're ready. This is not the basic commoditized MMP tech. It's different. They need to master aggregation. They need to master translation. Your partners need to know how to do that. They need to figure out how to transform from the old world of very accurate post back at the user level to now optimizing on a cohort basis. And, you know, we're basically advising people to be cautious. This is what we're telling our customers. Be cautious with the pop-up, because if you show it and you get a no, then you can't get the IDFA later. But you should experiment with soft consent pop-ups. Now, what is a soft consent? Someone asked about it basically in the Q&A and said, you know, could I trick Apple by showing my own window and not really the real window? So I'll be careful answering that one, because basically this is more of a legal interpretation topic. And I think that I've seen someone, we had a discussion about it in our Slack group, which I'll share in a second. And I think someone basically said that you might be tricking the users by doing that, because if someone clicks no and you're still tracking them, you may be deceiving your user. So it's almost like if you ask them, no matter if it's the Apple pop-up or not, you're technically are obligated to do what you ask them. So that's something you would do with your legal, maybe ask your legal team. I don't have the perfect answer for it yet, but definitely a topic to talk about it in our Slack group. And speaking of the Slack group, this thing has just exploded beyond my expectations. I highly encourage, if you guys are not invited yet or not in that group, there's over 2,000 individuals in that group just talking about all these questions. So we'll send the link. We'll send the link, or actually just use that email marketing@singular.net. Just say, hey, I want to join the MAP, I want to join the group. We'll send you an invite. It's open for everybody. And you can ask those follow-up questions there. I mean, just like these wonderful questions. So thank you. That's it for me. Hopefully this was a good taste. I know 20 minutes is not enough to talk about this complex topic, but Kaylee, do we have time for maybe Q&A or?
Yeah, 20 minutes is never enough time, is it? We do have a few more questions that have come in. I know you've been kind of addressing them as you go. I think one question that's come up a couple times today and hasn't yet been answered is, if a company has 2 to 3 new potential games ready to launch on iOS, should they launch now and somehow transition the current learning to LAT era?
Yeah. So basically, it's a good question.
Yeah.
If you have it ready to launch, yeah, the thing is, if you already have games live right now, then you may want to test on them. If you have nothing, then yes, maybe that would be smart to do, because essentially you'll have 4 to 6 months of experimenting with both very granular IDFA-based data, as well as the Ska Network data. And probably the best thing you could do is, you'll know what is the Ska Network value that you've assigned to each individual user at the IDFA level, at least for the next 4 to 6 months. So it will really help you optimize your engine. I mean, we're working on models that utilize predictive signals, they utilize historical data, and as long as we can get the IDFA, that will be another valuable input, because it's almost like the answer. You'll know the real value, so you'll be able to tweak your Ska Network data. So I would say yes, unless it's really hurting your business. At the end of the day, even after IDFA is gone, people will launch games. They'll just have to figure out how they do that. Maybe they'll use their past learnings. Maybe there's going to be a lot of great content about how you could optimize it. I think it's a matter of time before we'll see people start writing about techniques and what works best for games.
Great. Good answer. Another one that has come up a couple times, and I don't think we've been able to address yet, is around targeting and display ads.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I see the question right now. So, can we do targeting display ads, or is it too dependent on IDFA? So really, if you think about it, it doesn't matter if it's display ads or video ads or anything. Essentially, before you even show the ad, there's an ad network that needs to know whether to target an individual or not. And let's take Facebook, for example. The main Facebook app, and maybe Instagram, maybe WhatsApp, if it has ads at some point. These apps know so much about you. They have their Facebook profile. So inside their app, they have no problem targeting you, and they can do anything they want, display ads, video, etc. But if you're talking about, display ads in mobile web. So yeah, part of the thing about mobile web as well is the context, like which website are you in? And does that website recognize you? Today, mobile web doesn't even use IDFA. So whatever targeting you're getting today may be based on some form of fingerprinting, which is also going to be a challenge in iOS 14. But depending on the website, like if you go to a website and you're logged in and they know who you are, or maybe they use cookies to track you, which is still allowed for a little bit longer depending on the browser. Safari is actually pretty good at blocking them, but technically on mobile web you could still be tracked even if IDFA is not there, and you could still see targeted display ads.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have for today. Oh, the only other one, the people did want to know about your cool video zooming tool.
Oh yeah.
I think everyone has loved watching that. Okay, cool. I like that.
Yeah, I send a response. An app called It's a funny name, but yeah, MMHMM. Just search it.
Very, very sleek for digital events like this. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah.
And for sharing your insights on iOS 14.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
All right. You too.